There is a thought experiment that planetary scientists return to quietly when nobody is watching. Take the moon away, not slowly, not gradually, just remove it. Tomorrow morning, the moon is gone. The tides die first. Within 6 hours, the great rhythmic breathing of the ocean stops. The coastal ecosystems that depend on the twice daily exchange of water begin to collapse within days. The salt marshes drain. The mangroves die. The intertidal zones, which contain some of the densest biological diversity on Earth, become either permanently submerged or permanently dry. But that is the short version. The short version is a disaster. The long version is worse. Within 10,000 years, Earth's axial tilt, the angle that gives us seasons, that gives us a stable climate, that allowed agriculture to develop in the first place, begins to wobble. Within a million years, the wobble becomes chaotic. The poles drift. The equator drifts. Ice ages and hothouse periods cycle on timescales too fast for ecosystems to adapt. Within 10 million years, the climate of Earth has become so unstable that nothing the size of a human being can plausibly survive it. The moon is not just a light in the sky. The moon is the reason there is a sky to look at. This is a story about a relationship 4.5 billion years old. It is a story about how a single accident in the first 100 million years of the solar system produced a partnership that made every living thing on this planet possible, including the one watching this. The moon did not just witness the history of life on Earth. The moon caused it. 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was not alone. The early solar system was a violent place. Dozens of protoplanets were still orbiting the sun, colliding, merging, fragmenting. The planets we know today were the survivors of a long demolition derby. Most of the original objects did not make it. One of them was called Theia. Theia was approximately the size of Mars. It formed somewhere in the inner solar system, in an orbit that brought it close to the proto-Earth. The current best model, refined steadily over the last 20 years and now supported by both isotopic chemistry and computer simulation, is that Theia struck the proto-Earth at a shallow angle, traveling at roughly 4 kilometers per second, approximately 4.5 billion years ago. The collision did not destroy either world. It rearranged them. Most of Theia's mass merged with the proto-Earth. Much of Theia's mantle, along with a significant fraction of the proto-Earth's outer layers, was hurled into orbit as a glowing ring of vaporized rock. That ring cooled, condensed, and over the next few thousand years coalesced into a single body. The moon. This is the giant impact hypothesis, and it is supported by something remarkable. The Apollo samples, returned in the 1970s, share isotopic signatures with Earth rocks that are nearly identical, far closer than any other body in the solar system. The moon is chemically a piece of Earth, or more precisely, the moon is a piece of both Earth and Theia, mixed together at temperatures hot enough to vaporize granite, then cooled into a single companion world. The Earth that emerged from this collision was not the Earth that existed before it. It was spinning faster, initially with a day length of roughly 5 to 6 hours. It was tilted differently. It had a different atmosphere, a different chemistry, and a different magnetic field. And it had, for the first time, a moon. This is the moment I want you to hold in your mind for the rest of this video. The moon was not added to Earth. The moon and the Earth as we know it were created in the same event. They are not neighbors. They are siblings, produced by the same impact, from the same material, at the same instant. Every property of Earth that made life possible was, in some way, shaped by that collision and by the moon that emerged from it. We are about to look at four of those properties. The tides are the most visible thing the moon does to Earth. Every coastal city in the world schedules its life around them. Every fishing community for the entire history of human civilization has known their rhythm. The tides rise and fall twice a day, most places, pulled by the gravitational tug of the moon, with a smaller contribution from the sun. But the tides do something far stranger than fill harbors and strand starfish. The tides may have started life. This is not a metaphor. It is a serious scientific hypothesis with growing evidence behind it. The problem of how life on Earth began, abiogenesis, the transition from non-living chemistry to living biology, is one of the deepest unsolved questions in science. We do not know exactly how it happened. We know roughly when, between 4.0 and 3.7 billion years ago. We know roughly what conditions existed, and we have several competing hypotheses for the chemistry involved. But the activation problem is real. Organic molecules need to be concentrated, brought together, made to react, broken apart, recombined, and selected for stability, all without the help of any pre-existing biological machinery. You need a process that concentrates, dilutes, concentrates again. You need a process that cycles repeatedly over geological time. You need a process that creates wet-dry cycles, that drives molecules across membranes, that pumps energy into chemical systems faster than entropy can drain it out. The tides do exactly that. When the moon was young, it was much closer to Earth than it is now. Roughly 4 billion years ago, the moon was approximately 15 to 20 times closer than it is today. The tides it produced were not the gentle 2-meter rises we see at modern BACs. They were colossal. The early lunar tides reached hundreds of meters in vertical amplitude. They swept inland for tens of kilometers. They retreated just as fast. The coastlines of the early Earth were not stable boundaries between land and sea. They were vast, pulsing zones where the ocean advanced and withdrew, twice a day, across enormous distances. Every advance left pools. Every retreat concentrated whatever was dissolved in them. Every return refilled them with fresh chemistry from the open ocean. This is, in chemical terms, a reactor. The hypothesis is called the tidal pool model of abiogenesis, and it has been gaining ground for the last 20 years. The argument runs like this. The early ocean was dilute. Whatever organic precursors existed in it, amino acids, simple sugars, nucleotide fragments, lipids, were spread thin. For chemistry to do anything interesting, you need concentration. You need molecules to bump into each other often enough that reactions become probable. A tidal pool, evaporating in the sun between tides, concentrates everything it contains by an enormous factor. A pool that started at 1 part per million might end at 1 part per thousand by the time the next tide returns. Molecules that would never have encountered each other in the open ocean find themselves in close, repeated contact. And then the tide returns. The pool refills. The chemistry resets, but not completely. Some of what formed during the dry phase persists. The cycle repeats every 12 hours for hundreds of millions of years. The mathematics of this kind of cycling reactor are staggering. Even with extremely low probabilities of any single useful reaction occurring, the sheer number of cycles, somewhere on the order of 10 to the 11th tidal cycles in the first 500 million years of Earth's history, produces an enormous search space. Whatever chemistry could happen did happen somewhere eventually. It is not certain that life began this way. There are competing hypotheses: deep sea hydrothermal vents, hot springs on volcanic landmasses, ice-covered crevasses, even the surfaces of clay minerals, each with its own evidence and advocates. The honest scientific position is that we do not yet know which of these processes produced the first self-replicating chemistry, and it may be that more than one contributed. But the tidal hypothesis is unique in one respect: it requires the moon. The other hypotheses do not. Hydrothermal vents would have existed without the moon. Hot springs would have existed without the moon. Clay surfaces would have existed without the moon. But the tidal hypothesis is, by construction, a moon-driven model. If life on Earth began in tidal pools, and there is a real case that it did, then life on Earth began because of the moon. This is the first thing I want you to carry forward: the moon's most visible effect on Earth, the one every schoolchild learns about, the one tide charts have been published for centuries to predict, may also be the effect that started the entire chain of events that produced you. There is something almost unbearable about this idea. When you sit with it, the moon rises. Tonight, as it has risen for 4.5 billion years. The tides come in as they have come in for 4.5 billion years. And somewhere, in some pool, on some coastline, the chemistry that produced the first living thing on Earth happened because the moon was pulling on the water. You are downstream of a tide that came in approximately 4 billion years ago. The Earth is tilted, not perfectly upright in its orbit around the sun, but leaning over at an angle of 23.5 degrees. This tilt is the reason there are seasons. It is the reason summer in the northern hemisphere coincides with winter in the southern. It is the reason temperate latitudes have predictable cycles of growth and dormancy. It is the reason agriculture, with its planting and harvest seasons, was even possible. The tilt is also remarkably stable. Over the last million years, Earth's axial tilt has varied between approximately 22.1 and 24.5 degrees in a slow cycle of about 41,000 years. That is a tiny variation. It is small enough that the basic climate pattern of the planet has remained intact across the entire history of complex life. Tropical regions have stayed tropical. Polar regions have stayed polar. The continents have wandered. The climate has warmed and cooled, but the underlying geometry of seasons has held. This is not normal. Mars, our nearest planetary neighbor, has no large moon. Its two satellites, Phobos and Deimos, are captured asteroids weighing essentially nothing on a planetary scale. And as a result, Mars has nothing to stabilize its axial tilt. The current tilt of Mars is 25.2 degrees, similar to Earth's, but this is a recent state. Over the last few million years, Mars has tilted as far as 60 degrees and as little as 10 degrees. The chaos is not theoretical. It is recorded in the geology. There are layered ice deposits at the Martian poles that document repeated dramatic shifts in the planet's orientation toward the sun. When Mars tilts hard, its poles point at the sun, the ice caps sublimate, the atmosphere thickens, and the planet enters a wildly different climate state. Then it tilts back, and the climate collapses again. Calculations by Jacques Lascar and his colleagues at the Paris Observatory in the 1990s, refined many times since, suggest that without the moon, Earth would behave the same way. Without the moon, Earth's axial tilt would vary chaotically between approximately 0 degrees and 85 degrees on timescales of millions of years. The planet would lurch from a state with no seasons at all, sun directly over the equator year-round, to a state where the poles pointed nearly at the sun, baking one hemisphere for an entire half year while the other froze in total darkness. No climate system could remain stable through that. No ice cap could persist. No biome could establish itself. Complex life that requires generations of stable environmental conditions, forests, grasslands, coral reefs, ecosystems with intricate dependencies between species, could not develop because the timescales of climatic chaos are too short for evolution to track. The moon prevents all of this. The mechanism is simple in principle. The moon is large enough and close enough that its gravitational pull dominates the torques acting on Earth's rotational axis. The Sun and the other planets try to tip Earth in various directions over geological time. The moon resists. Like a gyroscope kept steady by a heavy flywheel, Earth's tilt is locked into a narrow range because the moon is always there, holding it. This stabilization is the reason Earth has been continuously habitable in roughly the same climate regime for billions of years. It is worth pausing on this. The continuous habitability of a planet, the property of staying livable across geological time, is much harder than the property of being livable at any single moment. Many planets in our galaxy may pass through habitable phases briefly. Venus may have been habitable for hundreds of millions of years before its greenhouse runaway. Mars may have been habitable for a similar period before its atmosphere thinned, but neither of them stayed habitable. Earth did, and one of the reasons Earth did is the moon. There is a real argument made by some astrobiologists that the rarity of large moons around terrestrial planets may be one of the factors that explains why we do not see obvious signs of complex life elsewhere in the galaxy. The Fermi paradox, the question of why we have not yet detected alien civilizations, has many proposed answers, but one of them is simply that planets like Earth, with stable climates over billion-year timescales, may be much rarer than we initially assumed. And one of the reasons they may be rare is that they require a large moon, formed by an improbable giant impact event in a stable orbit for the entire history of the planet. This is the second thing to hold on to. The moon does not just affect Earth's weather. The moon makes Earth's weather possible. The reason there is a climate at all, stable enough to permit the rise of forests and the evolution of mammals and the development of agriculture, is that 384,000 kilometers away from us, a 7.3 quintillion ton mass is holding our axis steady. Take the moon away, and the seasons do not just stop. They become unrecognizable, then chaotic, then catastrophic. When the moon formed, Earth was spinning fast. The current best estimates put the day length of the early Earth at somewhere between 5 and 6 hours. The sun rose, crossed the sky, and set in less time than a modern person spends at work. The planet was a spinning top, recently energized by the giant impact, still partially molten, rotating so quickly that its equator bulged outward and its surface gravity was noticeably lower at the equator than at the poles. The Earth does not spin that fast anymore. The moon slowed it down. The mechanism is called tidal braking, and it is one of the most elegant physical processes in the solar system. When the moon raises tides on Earth, it does not just raise tides in the ocean. It also raises tides in the solid rock of the planet itself, slight bulges in the crust, only centimeters high, that travel around Earth as Earth rotates. These bulges do not align perfectly with the moon. Because Earth rotates faster than the moon orbits, the bulges are dragged slightly ahead of the moon's position. They lead the moon. and the moon's gravity pulls back on them, applying a small but constant braking torque to the Earth's rotation. Over billions of years, this braking has slowed Earth's day from 6 hours to 24. The energy lost from Earth's rotation does not disappear. By conservation of angular momentum, it is transferred to the moon, which responds by spiraling slowly outward away from Earth. The moon is currently receding from Earth at approximately 3.8 centimeters per year, a number we know with extraordinary precision because the Apollo astronauts left retroreflectors on the lunar surface, and we still bounce lasers off them today. The moon is leaving us, slowly, about the rate at which fingernails grow. This recession is not a problem on any timescale we will ever experience, but over geological time, it is the dominant fact about the moon's relationship to Earth. The moon was much closer in the past. The moon will be much farther in the future. The Earth was spinning much faster in the past. The Earth will be spinning much slower in the future. The two trends are linked. As the moon recedes, the Earth's day lengthens. They are two sides of the same conservation equation. So what? Here is what. The day length of a planet is not a trivial parameter. It controls almost everything else about the planet's climate, weather, and biology. A planet with a 6-hour day has wildly different atmospheric dynamics than a planet with a 24-hour day. The Coriolis force, the apparent deflection of moving air and water caused by planetary rotation, is much stronger on a fast-spinning planet. Storm systems are tighter, more violent, and more frequent. Winds are faster. Ocean circulation patterns are completely different. Heat distribution between the equator and the poles is less efficient, which means equatorial regions are hotter and polar regions are colder. The early Earth, with its 6-hour day, was not a hospitable place by modern standards. It was a planet of relentless storms, vicious winds, and extreme temperature gradients. Even setting aside the giant tides we discussed earlier, the atmospheric conditions alone would have made the surface a punishing environment for any complex organism, if complex organisms had existed yet, which they did not. The slow lengthening of the day, driven by the moon, was a slow gentling of the planet. As the day lengthened, the Coriolis force weakened. Storm systems became larger and less violent. Winds slowed. The temperature gradient between equator and poles became more efficient at distributing heat. The atmosphere itself, which had been whipped around the planet at high speeds, gradually settled into the more stable circulation patterns we recognize today. The Hadley cells, the jet streams, the predictable seasonal monsoons, life evolved into this slowing. The earliest photosynthetic organisms appeared roughly 3.5 billion years ago, when the day was probably around 12 hours. The first complex multicellular organisms appeared roughly 600 million years ago, when the day was around 22 hours. The dinosaurs lived on a planet with a 23-hour day. Modern humans evolved on a planet with a 24-hour day. Every organism that has ever existed evolved in a specific tidal rotational regime, and that regime has been steadily changing. There is a striking piece of evidence for this. Certain fossil corals contain daily growth rings, similar to tree rings, but laid down on a daily and yearly cycle. By counting the rings between annual markers, geologists can determine how many days were in a year at the time the coral was alive. Devonian corals from 400 million years ago record approximately 400 days per year. Cambrian fossils suggest closer to 420 days. The number of days in a year has been decreasing throughout geological history, not because Earth's orbit is changing, but because each day is getting longer. You can read the lengthening of the day in the growth lines of fossil shells. The moon, in other words, has been slowly editing the rhythm of life on Earth. Every species that has ever lived has lived on a planet with a slightly different day length than its ancestors. The circadian rhythms encoded in our own biology, the cycles of sleep and wakefulness, the daily fluctuation of body temperature, the timing of hormone release, are calibrated to the current 24-hour day, but they were inherited from ancestors who lived on faster spinning planets with shorter days in a steady evolutionary progression. The moon set the metronome of life, and the metronome has been slowing down for 4 billion years. This is the third thing to hold on to. The moon is covered in scars, every crater on its surface, and there are tens of thousands of them visible from Earth alone, with millions more visible from orbit, is a record of an impact. Each one is a moment when a rock from somewhere in the solar system, traveling at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, struck the moon. Each one is also a rock that did not strike Earth. The moon has, for 4 billion years, served as a partial shield for Earth. It is not a perfect shield. It is not even a large shield in terms of its cross-sectional area. The moon presents a much smaller target than Earth does. But for objects that pass through the Earth-Moon system in geometrically specific ways, the moon does intercept a measurable fraction of the impactors that would otherwise have reached us. More importantly, the moon's gravity perturbs the orbits of objects passing near the Earth-Moon system. Some of those objects are deflected away from Earth. Others are deflected toward it. The net effect over geological time is complex, and the question of whether the moon is, on balance, a shield or a hazard is still debated among planetary scientists. But here is what is not debated. During the heavy bombardment phase of the early solar system, the period roughly 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago, when the inner solar system was being pelted by the leftover debris of planet formation, the moon took an enormous number of hits. We know this because we can see the craters. We can date them. We have brought back samples from many of them. The moon's surface is a 4 billion year archive of the bombardment history of the inner solar system, and that archive is dense with impacts. The same bombardment was happening to Earth. We just cannot see the craters anymore. Plate tectonics, erosion, and sedimentation have erased almost all of the impact record on Earth's surface. The moon preserved the record because it has no weather, no oceans, no continents, and no tectonics. Every hit it ever took is still visible. If you want to know what the early Earth experienced, look at the moon. The moon is the diary that Earth threw away. And here is the implication for life. The heavy bombardment ended roughly 3.8 billion years ago. The earliest unambiguous evidence of life on Earth dates from approximately 3.7 billion years ago. Almost. Immediately after the bombardment subsided. This timing is not coincidental. Whatever process produced the first living organisms on Earth, it could not have succeeded while the planet was being repeatedly re-sterilized by large impacts. Life had to wait for the bombardment to end. The moon's role in this is twofold. First, it absorbed some of the impacts that would otherwise have hit Earth, particularly during the late heavy bombardment. Second, and more importantly, it documents the bombardment in a way that allows us to know when it ended, which tells us when the window for life to emerge actually opened. The moon did not save Earth from the bombardment. The bombardment was too large for the moon to meaningfully reduce. But the moon recorded it. And in recording it, the moon told us something profound, that the emergence of life on Earth happened essentially the moment conditions permitted it. As soon as the planet stopped being repeatedly sterilized, life appeared. The window opened and something walked through it almost immediately. This is a hint, only a hint, but a real one, that the origin of life may not be a vanishingly improbable event. On Earth, given the right conditions, it happened fast. The moon is the timekeeper that lets us measure how fast. There is also a stranger possibility, which I want to mention briefly before moving on. The bombardment may not have been purely destructive. Some of the impactors that struck Earth and the moon during this period were carbonaceous chondrites, rocky bodies rich in water, organic molecules, and complex carbon chemistry. The current best estimates suggest that a significant fraction of Earth's water, and possibly a significant fraction of Earth's initial organic inventory, was delivered by impacts during exactly this period. The same impacts that almost prevented life from beginning may have also delivered the raw materials it needed. We do not yet know how much of Earth's water came from impacts versus how much was already present in the planet's interior from its formation. This is an active area of research, and the answer keeps shifting as new measurements come in. But the broad picture is clear. The early solar system was not just throwing rocks at Earth. It was throwing rocks that contained, dissolved within them, the chemistry of life. And the moon was watching all of it, taking its own share of the hits, and keeping a record we can still read today. The fourth thing to hold on to: the moon is the only direct physical evidence we have of what the early Earth went through. Without the moon's preserved surface, we would have almost no idea how the planet that produced us was forged. The moon is in your body. This is not a metaphor, and it is not mysticism. The moon is measurably and demonstrably encoded in the biology of nearly every multicellular organism on Earth, including you. The mechanisms by which it got there are well understood. The implications are still being worked out. Start with the obvious cases. Many marine organisms reproduce on a lunar cycle. Coral reefs across vast areas of the tropics spawn in synchronized mass events keyed to specific phases of the moon. On the Great Barrier Reef, hundreds of coral species release eggs and sperm into the water simultaneously, in the same week, in the same hour every year, and the timing is set by the lunar cycle, modified by water temperature and day length. The synchronization is so tight that the entire reef can be visibly clouded with reproductive material at the same moment. Sea turtles time their nesting to lunar cycles. Horseshoe crabs come ashore to spawn at specific tides on specific nights. Certain species of fish, the California grunion is the famous example, spawn precisely at the high tides immediately following the full and new moons, riding the highest tides of the month onto sandy beaches where they bury their eggs above the reach of subsequent tides. These are organisms whose entire reproductive biology is calibrated to the moon. Without the moon, they would not reproduce on a coordinated schedule. Without coordinated reproduction, many of their populations would collapse. But this is just the most visible layer. Almost every organism on Earth, marine or terrestrial, contains internal biological clocks that track the daily 24-hour cycle. These circadian rhythms are encoded in DNA, expressed through specific proteins, and entrained to environmental cues, primarily light. They control sleep, hunger, body temperature, immune function, cell division, hormone release, and dozens of other physiological processes. They are present in every kingdom of life that has been examined for them. Even bacteria have something like them. Circadian rhythms are calibrated to the day length set by Earth's rotation, which is itself set by the moon's tidal breaking. The moon, in other words, calibrated the metronome to which every organism on Earth has tuned its biology. But there is also a second clock, a lunar one. Circalunar and circadial rhythms are biological cycles that track the lunar month or the tidal cycle rather than the solar day. They have been documented in marine worms, in midges, in certain crustaceans, in some species of fish, and, controversially, in humans. The human case is where this gets interesting and contested. There is a long history of cultural belief that the moon affects human behavior. The word lunatic comes from the Latin for moonstruck. Hospital emergency room workers and police officers have long claimed that full moons coincide with increased admissions and incidents, though most rigorous studies have failed to confirm this. The popular association between the moon and madness is, by most scientific accounts, not supported by good evidence. But that does not mean the moon has no effect on human biology. The question of whether it does has been quietly reopened in the last decade by a series of studies on human sleep. In 2013, a study published in Current Biology found that human sleep, measured under strictly controlled laboratory conditions where participants could not see the moon and did not know what phase it was in, varied measurably with the lunar cycle. Around the full moon, participants took longer to fall asleep, slept for shorter total durations, and had reduced deep sleep stages. The effect was small, on the order of 20 minutes of total sleep time, but it was statistically robust and persisted across the entire participant pool. Subsequent studies have replicated some of these findings and failed to replicate others. The picture is genuinely unsettled. But more recent work, including a 2021 study tracking sleep across both rural and urban populations, has found that sleep onset and duration vary with the lunar cycle in a way that is consistent across very different lighting environments, including indigenous communities in Argentina with no electric lighting and university students in Seattle. The mechanism is not yet understood. The effect may not even be real, but it is being taken seriously enough that it is being studied. We do not have a complete answer to the question of whether human biology contains a lunar clock. We may simply be detecting the echo of an ancient one, inherited from marine ancestors hundreds of millions of years ago and never fully erased. We may be detecting something currently active. We may be detecting artifacts in the data. But here is what is not controversial. Many of our closest relatives on the evolutionary tree, going back tens of millions of years, lived in environments where the moon mattered enormously. Tidal zones, coastal forests, savanna landscapes where moonlight at night meant the difference between safe foraging and lethal exposure to predators. Human cognition and human visual biology evolved in an environment where the moon was a major presence. The dark adapted human eye is sensitive enough to read by the light of a full moon. The human visual system contains specific neural pathways optimized for low light navigation. We carry in our bodies the equipment of a species that has been living under the moon for as long as we have been a species at all. And then there is the cultural dimension, which I will only briefly sketch because it could be its own video. Every human culture in every region of the planet throughout the recorded history of human civilization has tracked the lunar cycle. The lunar month is one of the oldest units of timekeeping in human culture, predating the solar calendar by thousands of years. The oldest known calendar, markings on a baboon fibula found in Eswatini, dated to roughly 35,000 years ago, appears to be a lunar count. The earliest agricultural societies used the moon to schedule planting, harvest, and migration. The world's major religions are saturated with lunar timing. The Islamic calendar is purely lunar. The Jewish calendar is lunisolar. The Christian date of Easter is set by the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. The moon is not just a thing we look at. The moon is one of the oldest structures inside human culture and arguably inside human cognition. We are, in a real sense, a species shaped by the moon, not just biologically, not just behaviorally, but in the categories we use to organize time, the patterns we use to understand light and darkness, and the symbols we use to make sense of cycles, returns, and renewal. Every full moon you have ever seen has activated some piece of cognitive machinery that has been there in your lineage for tens of millions of years. The moon is not above you. The moon is in you. Right now, as you watch this, the moon is doing all of these things at once. It is pulling on the oceans. There is a tidal bulge on the side of Earth facing the moon, and another on the side facing away. And somewhere on Earth, a coastline is being submerged, and somewhere else, a coastline is being uncovered. In the intertidal zones, billions of organisms are responding to the tide, opening, closing, feeding, hiding, spawning. The biological clocks of marine life are reading the position of the moon in the sky. It is holding Earth's axis steady. The 23.5-degree tilt that gives us seasons is being preserved at this moment by the moon's gravitational influence on the bulge at Earth's equator. Without that influence, the tilt would already be drifting. The current weather you are experiencing, whatever season it is, wherever you are, exists because the moon is doing its work right now, as it has done for 4 billion years. It is slowing the rotation of the Earth. The day you are living through is approximately 1.7 milliseconds longer than the day that existed 100 years ago. The energy is being transferred to the moon, which is moving away from Earth at this moment, at roughly the rate that your fingernails are growing. By the time you finish watching this video, the moon will be measurably farther away than it was when you started. It is being struck by micrometeorites. Small impacts are happening to the moon constantly, recording the small-scale impact flux of the inner solar system on a surface that, unlike Earth's, preserves everything. It is illuminating the night side of Earth. Somewhere right now, a moth is navigating by lunar light. Somewhere, a nocturnal predator is hunting by it. Somewhere, a person is walking home from work, looking up and noticing it without quite thinking about why. It is in your body. The clocks in your cells are tuned to a day length that the moon set. Some of those clocks may be tracking the lunar cycle directly. Your visual system is calibrated to a range of light intensities that includes moonlight as a meaningful signal. Your cultural inheritance, the calendar you use, the holidays you celebrate, the metaphors you reach for when you talk about cycles and returns, is partly lunar. The moon is not a passive object that the Earth happens to have. The moon is an active participant in the system that produces the Earth as we know it, the life on it as we know it, and the experience of being alive on it as we know it. We are about to enter a period in which this relationship may change. In the next 20 years, humanity will return to the moon, this time to stay. There are active plans for permanent bases, for mining operations, for lunar industry. The moon is about to become, for the first time in its history, a place where things happen, where machinery operates, where structures are built, where human beings live and die. The moon will not become less important to Earth because of this, but our relationship to it will become something it has never been before: reciprocal. For 4 billion years, the moon has shaped Earth and Earth has only watched. We are now, for the first time, in a position to shape the moon. What we do there will reflect what we believe about the relationship that produced us. A thought experiment to close. Imagine that the giant impact 4.5 billion years ago had been slightly different. A little faster, a little slower, a little more glancing, a little more direct. Imagine that Theia had struck a few thousand years earlier, or later, or not at all. Almost any small change to that collision produces a different outcome. In some of these alternative histories, no moon forms. The debris ring disperses back into the planet, or scatters away, or settles into a system of small rings that never coalesce. Earth ends up moonless. In some, the moon is smaller, big enough to be visible, but not big enough to stabilize the axis, not big enough to raise meaningful tides, not big enough to slow the rotation in any significant way. In some, the moon is in a different orbit, closer, and the tides tear the early Earth apart. Farther, and the moon's effects diminish until they no longer matter. In all of these alternatives, the Earth that emerges is not the Earth we live on. The climate is chaotic, or the day is too short, or the tides are absent, or the bombardment record is lost. The chemistry of the early oceans is different. The conditions for life are different. The trajectory of evolution, if it occurs at all, is different. In some of these alternative Earths, no complex life ever develops. In some, it develops but never reaches anything like human cognition. In some, it reaches cognition but in forms we would not recognize. We are the result of one specific outcome of one specific collision. The moon is the most visible piece of evidence of that collision, still in orbit, still doing the work it has done from the beginning. It is the reason we have seasons, the reason we have tides, the reason we have a stable day, the reason we have a livable climate, possibly the reason we have life at all, and certainly the reason that life took the specific forms it did. We did not get a moon. We got this moon. And this moon has been making us slowly for 4.5 billion years. The next time you see it, tonight or tomorrow or next week, try to hold this in your mind for just a moment. The moon is not a decoration in the sky. The moon is part of how the Earth works. The moon is part of how you work. You are looking at a piece of yourself.